You're listening to Resilience Rising, the podcast that shatters poverty myths, sparks optimism, and fuels innovative change through community-inspired discussions. On behalf of Brian and myself, I'm honored to acknowledge that we are currently recording on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. CFS Counseling and Wellbeing and United Way Simcoe Muskoka respect Indigenous history and culture and are dedicated to moving forward in the process of reconciliation with all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people.
So I'm Brian Shelley from United Way Simcoe Muskoka, and I'm joined today by Amanda Fellows from CFS Counseling and Wellbeing. And this is the first episode of Resilience Rising. And so excited to be launching this project with you folks. We hope that this is a great opportunity for us to bring some challenging conversations to our public and at the end of the day, hopefully raise levels of empathy and understanding across Simcoe Muskoka.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to be here. And we have great first guests on this episode.
We do. So today we're going to be joined by Christine Bushy and Kelly Jones, and they're going to talk to us about how we define, understand, and begin to address poverty across Simcoe Muskoka. Welcome, Kelly. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start just by giving you each an opportunity to introduce yourself and why you're here joining us today. So Kelly, we'll start with you. What brings you here?
So I would like to think that, growing up in poverty, that lived experience lens that I have has landed me an incredible role with the YWCA Muskoka in doing the poverty reduction work that we do. And I'm extremely passionate about equity and community and everyone understanding that connection is really what makes the world thrive. So I hope that today we can have that conversation and hopefully others will start to follow suit.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And Christine, what brings you here with today?
I'm currently the chair of the Poverty Reduction Task Group in Simcoe County. My position that brings me there is I'm the manager of the Chronic Disease Prevention Program at the Simcoe Muskoka Health Unit. We know that there's a strong connection between various chronic diseases, heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and people who are living in low income. So there's some direct correlation there that brings me to chair the Poverty Reduction Task Group. Poverty Reduction Task Group has many community partners on it. There's a great partnership between our Poverty Reduction Task Group, various community partners, the health unit, and we're all working together to really help people to understand poverty, not only just what it is, but the actual lived experience of poverty, and look at how we can take action together.
That's awesome. You guys are exceptional first guests because I think that, the work that the Poverty Reduction Task Group will really help folks to understand what the landscape looks like for poverty here locally. And Kelly, really excited to hear about all of the innovative work that the YWCA is doing around Bridges Out of Poverty and circles and getting ahead and really great and cool, innovative ways to address some of those really critical poverty issues. So yay for first guests.
Yeah, and so, I want to touch on something that both of you kind of spoke to, and that's how do we define poverty? And so we'll start, Kelly, with you. How do you define poverty?
Yeah, I feel like poverty can't be defined in one category because there's so many layers to it. And automatically we just assume it's lack of finances. And so that just go get a job mentality is just kind of grinds my gears when I hear someone say that. And with the Bridges Out of Poverty work that I facilitate, we talk about 11 resources. So Brian, Amanda, Christine, everybody has 11 resources. And once one of those resources start to fall, everything else begins to fall with it. So one of the primary ones is relationship and role models. And if you don't have that in your life or the ability to connect with others, you can't get the 11 resources to feel topped up. So my definition would be the extent that an individual goes without resources.
Interesting, Christine. How would the health unit or the Poverty Reduction Task Group define poverty?
Yeah, there are a number of definitions for poverty. United Nations has a definition. The World Health Organization has a definition. The federal government came out with a poverty reduction strategy back in 2018. Their definition is more around measures like the market basket measure and how people do or don't measure up to that market basket measure. That's all very technical. That's all very wordy. It's statistics and targets. I like to think about poverty or define poverty as to the degree to which someone has the resources, various resources, all 11 resources, to really participate fully in their lives, fully in their community, and to live with dignity and respect.
Yeah, and I think the work of the poverty reduction task group does a lot of work to help folks understand those things. I wondered if you could speak to Christine, speak to the scope of some of the work that PRTG takes on to address and help people understand that it is more about all of these other elements and not just financial resources.
Absolutely. We do a lot of awareness raising, and it's more than just awareness raising about statistics and terminology and definitions. We really are trying to increase awareness and deep understanding of what it's like to live in poverty, experience poverty, all of the things that you struggle with on a day-to-day basis. As Kelly said, it's more than just, and not even possible sometimes, to just get up and get a job. There's so much more that impacts on people who are living in poverty, and so much more that they're struggling with. I think we really, as individuals, as organizations, particularly as elected officials, politicians, we need to understand that experience to really know that something has to be done, that this is not acceptable. We can't allow people to live in these kinds of situations. And so then what we want to do is we want to move from talk to action. So we do things like we hold events. We've held a couple of living wage events where we bring people together to talk about the impact that an actual living wage can have on people, the difference that it makes in their lives. We've hosted 2 Rethink Poverty events where we increase awareness, but then we talk about what action needs to be taken. We know that there are what we call structural drivers for poverty. It's things like politics, economy, commerce, our social structures, structures that put people and keep people in situations where they're experiencing discrimination and racism. There are structural drivers for poverty that we want to look at how we can take collective action on as a poverty reduction task group. So we do a lot of awareness raising, but we're also looking at things we can do to encourage collective action, things like encouraging living wage, encouraging social assistance reform, encouraging the implementation of a basic income in Ontario, in Canada, those kinds of drivers that really are the structures that put people in poverty and keep people in poverty. Those are the things that we want to raise awareness about and then encourage collective action on.
Thanks for that. I want to pick up on that with a question for Kelly. So, Kelly, Christine just mentioned policies and systems. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how do current systems and policies impact folks living in poverty in Simcoe Muskoka?
Yeah, I can only, sometimes I draw from my own experience, just having to have lived on Ontario Works for more than 12 years, being... $324 is what I received monthly for my shelter cost. I'm not sure where rent is that you're paying $324. Now, mind you, this was 6 years ago that I finally got off the system. So we were kind of in a housing crisis back then, too, if that was all that someone was getting for their Ontario Works check. And I had 2 kids. So the system that's in place isn't really thinking about the fact that you're being forced to go look for work. You only have $324 for rent. Your basic needs were another $320, maybe $350. So really your check is what, $750. Then you have to go find food. You have to have a phone. I think having a phone is a basic necessity. Sure. If you want to look for work, and they're forcing you to go look for work on all this.
And if you have kids as well, you've got to be able to be a point of contact for your kids at school. And
there's so many barriers. So just with that check alone and having to try and figure out how to navigate the system, you are a fish out of water. Where are your resources? So even if you're coming to the community new and that's what you're getting, where do you find the resources to tap into to be able to survive? So I think it's incredible that organizations have these sort of hubs where, especially if the organizations that collaborate with one another, saying, I have this resource. If you have people coming into your doors with a lack of this, we have that. And then you just start talking together, and all of a sudden now one person is being propelled forward and preventing any cliff effects that may happen from being on Ontario Works or Ontario Disability. The systems in place are unjust. It's really challenging too when we do talk about living wage, because the living wage measures are actually based off two people making that living wage. If you look at the graph, it's two people having to make that amount, which I believe it's $18.55 here in Muskoka. Simcoe, Muskoka.
In Muskoka, I think it's over 22 now in Simcoe.
Oh, so it's gone up. So over 22 for two people to make that. So if you looked at even 30% of rental income is what the government suggests, that no one should be paying more than 30%. Someone working minimum wage should only be paying $690 for rent. Where is that?
I think that's one of the real interesting misnomers out there, and I think I think people have trouble understanding the living wage concept. But if you can think of it, that someone can be fully employed, working 40 hours a week at minimum wage, they are living below the poverty line. They are going without.
Yeah, and I think of even the two income homes right now that are doing not horrible, they're still having to go to the food bank.
Sure.
The groceries are astronomical, and it's amazing that we have resources at schools, breakfast clubs, and Muskoka has Muskoka Food for Kids now. There's all these incredible programs that it's starting to alleviate the pressure of having to go to the food bank, because food is being a little bit more accessible. But people shouldn't have to go to the food bank if you work 40 hours a week. You're working for survival. You're not even working to thrive and enjoy the community that you live in.
We do have some local data in Simcoe and Muskoka. The health unit for many, many years has been conducting the nutritious food basket survey. So we go out to 14 grocery stores across Simcoe and Muskoka. We gather data on the cost of 62 different food items that would be considered a healthy food basket. We then calculate what it would cost to feed a single individual, family of four, for that basic food basket, and then we look at the cost of rent, and we know that the figures we get are somewhat underrepresented, and then we look at various wage scenarios, and we know that about 18% of Simcoe Muskoka residents are food insecure. They're experiencing some degree of food insecurity every year, and when you have a finite amount of money, I've often heard people say people will go hungry before they go homeless. Parents will go hungry before they let their children go hungry.
I would go days without food. In order to make sure my kids had lunch.
Yes.
Because the other component to that was if my kids went to school without a lunch, who are you getting a phone call from?
Right.
Children's Aid.
Right.
And that's a whole other ball game to jump through hoops, especially now living in one-bedroom apartments, mom and dad sleeping on a couch. You know, there's so many factors to what creates poverty for someone. And I used to use the food distribution baskets that you all distributed. The challenge with that was some of the vegetables were foreign because it's not something that you grew up with. So then recipes were needed, and then you have to add more ingredients. And but I loved it.
And at the end of the day, there are many, many struggles that people experience, and it comes down to lack of income. Food insecurity happens because people don't have the financial resources to be able to purchase their food. We know that only 25% of individuals who are food insecure will use a food bank. That's a very small percent. We have huge food bank use, but only 25% of people are actually using a food bank. They'll do other things. They will sell possessions. They will delay paying bills or rent. They will send their kids somewhere else to eat. They'll go without food. They'll skip meals. They'll go without food for days because they don't have enough money to put food on the table. Food security isn't solved by food charity. Food banks and community food programs absolutely essential to meet those urgent food needs. But we know it's a Band-Aid. Yeah. We need income solutions. And that's what Poverty Reduction Task Group is all about, is income solutions. Policy and program solutions to reduce poverty.
Well, and I think we saw some of that during COVID with CERB and those basic income pieces. And in an episode further down the road, we'll actually have our food bank partners be a part of those discussions just around how food bank usage was actually down when COVID first started, right? Because people were getting a basic income, which the Poverty Reduction Task Group also advocates for. I think the challenge is there are so many of these, what I hear you say is all of these really layered systemic issues that we don't always have a lot of control over. And so what I find really powerful is when we don't have control, we have to come up with innovative ways, to help support people who are living in poverty to it so they can empower themselves in the midst of all of those barriers. So I wonder, Kelly, can you speak to the work that you do at the YWCA and how this model is a really innovative approach to addressing poverty?
Yeah, so it's really, I love the work that we kind of brought into the YWCA. It started with our Getting Ahead program, which is a 12 to 15 week program that I actually had to attend because my life was just in such chaos and I didn't know where to go. I just knew that I deserved better. So I showed up. There was 15 other people just like me. That's a big fear. When you face poverty, you feel like you're alone, right? And I showed up, 15 other people. We're all around this table. And for 12 weeks, we talk about our life now, what it takes to make changes. We talked about theory of change and how that operates, because when you consistently go without, your brain stops really processing choice, and it becomes scarcity mindset, which is really challenging because you always think there's never going to be enough. And that's when we look at crime rates and the choices that we don't really see the consequence from because we're in survival mode. Right. So this is a great workshop that sort of pulls that down, makes us feel calm, and each week we just push forward towards SMART goals. Now, SMART goals is a middle class mindset. So when you're in poverty, we have to understand that middle class, that's how the world operates, is middle class, right? So when you're in poverty, like I said, you're a fish out of water because everything has rules and regulations and hidden rules. We identified that with parking today. There's all these rules that people don't really follow because they never grew up with that sort of education. So this is what we do for 12 weeks. We identify the world around us and that we do have choices that we can make and that we do have a voice. That is the other component to someone in poverty. They feel powerless to the authorities that hand them their check and that run the libraries and run the schools. So after the 12 weeks, we usually invite community members to come in and hear all about what we learned about and different ways to implement new ways for change that serve everybody. And so that's really rewarding. And then the second tier to that is Bridges Out of Poverty, which is a one-day workshop, could be two, whatever you need, where we take community members that serve the public. We lawyers, doctors, politicians, organizations, police officers, and health nurses. We have many of them that come in because they deal with people on the public daily. And you educate them about what poverty actually looks like. It's not just go get a job. So we talk about hidden rules and language, how that can be a barrier to someone's success. We talk about building relationship and how you can do that in 5 minutes versus just treating me like a piece of paper and a statistic that you need for your funders, right? And it's incredible to see all the ahas happening in the crowd when I facilitate that. When we put both of those together, we have Circles Muskoka, or Circles Canada, really. So Circles is a program where we take the person that graduated from Getting Ahead, we call them a leader because they're leading their new life, and we take someone who graduates from Bridges Out of Poverty and we call them a new ally. And if they want to continue their journey on understanding poverty, we pair them together. And what's happening there is a healthy relationship that creates stability and consistency, and it builds trust. And over time, not only does the leader learn new ways to create habit of change going forward, but the ally continues to learn and advocate against poverty and the systems that are holding it in place. And I can speak to this because I graduated from all of these programs and then I started running it for 6 years. And watching the community change over such an incredible program, volunteering has its benefits, but when you volunteer as someone's matched person, you are choosing to be with that person, and that makes the difference for that person because they feel connected to the world again. I could go on about Circles for hours, so you're going to have to stop me somewhere. But yeah, I am just so deeply rewarded that this program exists and that we get to teach community about poverty in a different perspective, and the fact that the resources start topping up in that group. We have 12 families and individuals in our Circles Muskoka program now, and we have about 15 volunteers working towards that new life for these individuals, and it's such a community effort. Yeah.
Well, and I think that the program that you're speaking to, which I think is an incredible service being provided in Muskoka. It's a really good example of how we have to understand that the social programs to move people from poverty to possibility aren't one and done.
Yeah.
It's a longitudinal, long-term change because it's undoing not just years, but actually generations
Yes.
of poverty and not even learned behavior, but generations of poverty and lived experience.
Yeah, the trauma of poverty alone, right? When you have to endure going without, like I mentioned before, that scarcity mindset over time continues to grow and grow and grow. So I am not denying that there are individuals that are in poverty that maybe helpless. Like, we cannot help that individual. We have to identify that we can help them in minuscule ways and with mental health supports, and really focusing on that individual. Potentially there could be that other side to this, but it's going to take even more work because that trauma gets so ingrained. There's just so many levels to the trauma of poverty. So when you look at an individual who's motivated for change, that, just was down on their luck for a couple of years, became homeless for a little bit, but is still connected to community, this program really asserts that individual into seeing the potential. It was actually my Ontario caseworker, my employment caseworker, that sat with me for a moment and said, if we removed all the barriers from your life right now, what would you want to be in life? And the funny thing is, if you asked me when I was a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? Never could imagine, because I had such a horrific childhood. I just could not, it was about survival daily. And when he did that, he gave me hope to dream in that one moment. And that's what this program does for individuals. They're allowing an opportunity to sit in a safe space and say, I want to be a doctor. What does that look like? Let's work towards those goals.
Christina, I want to put you on the spot. What is one policy change that could be implemented in our communities or in our province that would make a difference in supporting folks living in poverty right now?
Can I talk about more than one?
Absolutely.
Because there are a few. I think the most significant one would be, whether it's at the provincial level or collaboration between the province and the feds, would be basic income, which is a guaranteed transfer of funds. No matter what your wage is, it would set an income floor that nobody would go beneath. So if you're working a minimum wage job and it's lower than the basic income, you would get topped up. If you're on OW or ODSP and it's below that income floor, you would get topped up. So it keeps everybody at a level of income that allows them to fully participate in their lives and their community and live with dignity and respect. So basic income, I think, is one. There are other things that could also be done. Ontario Works rates, as Kelly spoke to, are extremely low. People do not have enough money even to afford food and rent, let alone other basic necessities. Income or Ontario Works ODSP reform, it needs to happen. Legislation like legislation that increases minimum wage, legislation that takes people out of precarious employment situations. Many people, we talked earlier about, if somebody is working full-time in a minimum wage job, there are very few full-time minimum wage jobs. Oftentimes, and it's often single women, have to have 2 and 3 jobs that are what we call precarious employment, right? 2 or 3 jobs that add up to your 40 hours a week, but keep you that much more time away from your family. You might not have 8 hours in a row. You might have 2 hours here, 3 hours there. You're back and forth. It takes time out of family. The one thing that I wanted to pick up on in terms of what Kelly was saying related to the trauma of poverty, we know that adverse childhood experiences actually physically change the brain. It has an impact on how children learn and how their brain grows and develops. Over time, toxic stress leads to physical changes in the body and in health. So we need to look at how we support our families, our communities to be very resilient, to really reduce those incidences of adverse childhood experiences, because that eventually leads to things like mental health and addictions, poverty, homelessness, not being able to get or keep a job. This is not a matter of choice. This is a matter of trauma that has occurred in people over years and sometimes over generations that really keep them paralyzed because of the significant impacts of trauma.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you were talking about food before, right? So that identifier, when someone's in poverty and they're overweight, one of the biggest things we hear is they're lazy.
Yeah.
And yet, people in poverty probably work the most hardest in a day to survive.
Yes.
And why are they overweight? Stress. The chronic stress. Otherwise, also, food banks usually only offer pasta and beans, and not everybody's body can have that, right?
Yes.
So when you have a basic income and you can have the option to go for nutrition, that every meal is a nutritiously dense food, your brain body connection, and so the chronic stress that is on your body diminishes, as well as mental and cognitive thinking diminishes, and you're able to function daily and deal with things a little bit easier, right? So your emotional response. So again, we're talking about these 11 resources, right? It all falls into basic income. So that we're not denying that income is not a necessity. It's number one on the list, right?
Yes.
So yeah, basic income is a start.
Yes, absolutely. And just picking up on that, I think one of the things that, in terms of a myth potentially about poverty, I would really like to dispel the myth that people who are living in poverty are just lazy, just need to get up and get a job. I truly believe that everyone on any given day is doing their best with the tools they have at the time. We need to give them better tools. We need to stop judging and criticizing people for the circumstances that they're in. There's a whole lot of reasons why people are in the circumstances they're in. They're doing the best they can with the tools they have at their disposal at the time. We need to, as community service organizations, as a community, as government policymakers, make it easier, give them the tools, because when people know better, they do better. When they have the resources to do better, they want to do better, they do better. And I think that's really important to understand.
I'm high-fiving you.
I feel like that actually really put a bow on the conversation, Christine, for today. I'm so grateful for this conversation, and what a great kickoff to this podcast. I think we're really grateful for the work that the Poverty Reduction Task Group does to create education and advocacy within our community. And we know the stellar work you're doing in Muskoka, Kelly, and I feel really privileged to listen to you and for your courage to lean on your lived expertise in that, because I think, that is also what helps support people and communities, is when, people are willing to also share their stories in that process. And so thank you so much for, being willing to bring that to the table as well.
Yeah, thanks so much to both of you. So Kelly, Christine, thank you for being our very first guests on our very first podcast. I'd also like to thank our studio partners at Uplift Black. We recorded today's podcast at their Upbeat Box Studio in the heart of downtown Barrie. And finally, and most importantly, I'd like to thank you at home for listening, or in your car for listening, or on your walk for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow us on social media using the hashtag ResilienceRising.
Thank you.
So we'll see you next time on episode 2, which will be dropping next week, when we discuss cracks in the local housing crisis. And I'm Amanda Fellows from CFS Counseling and Wellbeing.
I'm Brian Shelley from United Way Simcoe Muskoka.
And we're asking you to embrace innovative change to ensure our communities are great places to live for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much.